So once you've gathered your sleeve there, that's finishing step 18, and you can see I've made my marking here that that's where I need to stop. So now for the particular dress that I'm doing, I'm going to go back to my instructions for dress F and continue where I left off. So this is what we just did. Continue in same manner as dress B, paragraphs 12 through 18. Now we're going to be starting at number 16. Moving on to step 16, we're now going to be putting in those sleeves that we just finished. The easiest way for me to do this, and how I recommend doing it, is laying out your bodice, what you've done on your bodice so far, with the right side up, and then keep your sleeves, just for reference. So I know that sleeve front is number 7, which is the shorter pattern. So once again, just to double check, I'm going to fold over at the seam and find which one is shorter, this one. So I know that in this particular sleeve, the way it's laying right now, piece 7, the front piece, is in the front. So if I do the same thing for the other one, I'll once again find the shorter side, and it corresponds to that perfectly, so that's good. So I know that these are my fronts. So if I'm going to install the sleeve and I need this piece to be in front, then that means it's going to be in like this. And this is the seam that you're going to match. So just flip that over once you've laid it how it's supposed to be and match up those seams. And then just put in a pin there just for a quick reference, and you're going to do the same thing for the other sleeve. So this is my right side, this is the front. If I need this to be sewn in at the front, so like that, then it needs to go like this. So match up your seams and do a pin. And then basically when you finish pinning this, you're going to finish pinning it along like this and along like this. Now the trick here is that you have to match up your markings. So those gathering stitches you did earlier, you have the seam and then you have your 2 dots where you need to do your gathering stitches. You're going to pin both of those together. So just put in 1 pin and then find your corresponding marking on the other piece. So mine is here. Okay, and then pin those together. And then do the exact same thing for the other side. Find your marking. Okay. And then pin those together. Now you need to fit in this extra fabric. So you're just going to gather by pulling on the string until that fabric fits inside that space. Okay, and then just wrap the ends. Okay, and that will hold it in place while you stitch. So do the same thing on the other side. Grab your thread and just gently pull. Don't pull hard on this because you don't want to break your thread and have to do all that again. Okay, and just pull gently. Until it matches up. Alright, now you can put as many pins in this as you want. You can adjust the gathers to make them look nicer, however you want them. And then I would suggest that you put a lot of pins in this just so that it's easier to stitch. And I'll let you watch me sew one now. Alright, so here are my sleeves. And here we go. I'm just going to start at one end, and I think I have just enough thread on my bobbin to get through one sleeve before I'm going to have to refill my bobbin. So I'm going to set this to a long stitch, my longest stitch, 5, and then starting a little bit actually below the sleeve. Make sure everything is flat underneath. There we go. Okay, so I'm actually going to start before I hit the sleeve. And I'm just going to base that right on top of the pins. And because I don't want to have this basting show when I finish, I'm actually I'm going in slightly closer than 5/8 because I want it to be hidden inside of the seam. And it's a good idea to fill underneath here as you go, just to make sure that your fabric isn't rolling or doing anything odd, which is very easy with sleeves. Okay, especially when you get into your basting section through here where the fabric's really thick, especially mine with this velvet. All right, that's good. Continuing to fill underneath. It doesn't hurt to pull on this fabric gently every now and then too. Okay, keep going. And then go a little bit past your seam. Make sure that your bodice piece, whenever you reach this part underneath, is flat. Okay. All right, so that takes care of one. Now I'm going to take all these pins out. And then flip this out and just see if there's anything that looks odd. Okay, looks good. Looks good, gathers look good. Okay, there's a little bit of basting I am gonna have to take out of here. Okay, so now that this looks nice and I've checked it and it has my stamp of approval, I'm going to take this back out again. Put it back through the machine, and I'm going to reset my stitch to a regular stitch, and for me that's easiest to just turn on and off the machine. Do I have enough thread left? I think so. Okay. Now I'm going to stitch this at a true 5/8 inch. That way I won't have to remove as much basting. Okay. Doing the same thing you did before, constantly feeling. Okay. Still filling underneath, make sure everything's flat. Alright, now I'm approaching my bodice here. So I want to make sure that this is laying flat. Okay. Do a back stitch right over the end there. Take it out. Okay. And then I flip this out. All right, it looks nice. And there's only a little bit of basting that I'm going to have to remove here. If you can see that, it's hard on my white fabric. Other than that, it looks good. Okay, so do that for both of your sleeves. It wouldn't hurt to give it a little bit of a pressing again just because you've been pulling it everywhere, and then join me for the next step. So here's what I have after I've installed the little shoulders, or cap sleeve. I keep switching my terminology for these. So bodice, back, your little overlay here, and then a little cap sleeve. Now I'm doing the long sleeve version, so I still have to do sleeves to add into this, and I think that's what the pattern has us doing next, but this is what I have so far, and I'm really liking it. It looks really pretty, and let's just continue. Now that I've finished sewing in my sleeve cap, I have finished step 16, And moving on to step 17, I actually get sent back to dress C, paragraphs 14 through 16. So if I find my dress C, which is right here, and then I'm looking for those steps, I actually have to flip the page here. And then here is number 14. So we'll be needing our sleeve piece 10, and then we're going to be finishing up the sleeve. So starting at 14, we're going to be doing our upper ease stitch so that we can gather this into the bodice. So on piece 10, we have these 3 dots right here, the seam, and then another one here. Those are your dots for doing your ease stitch. So you're going to start an ease stitch here, and that's just that long stitch that we've been using for basting as well, and then you're going to stop here. And you don't back stitch those. The most important thing is to make sure that the length is long and that you have long threads on both sides so that you can gather those more easily. So I already have mine marked on both of mine. If you can see this. Yes. So now I'm just going to do my ease stitch. So you can watch me do that on the machine now. So I'm ready to do my ease stitch now. I have the thread length set to the longest that I have available at 5. And here's the top of my sleeve, and here's my dot. Make sure that you have threads that you can pull on later. Okay. And then just start stitching that with your long stitch. So there's one. We're getting to 1 dot right now, and that is just the top of the seam. So we need to go a little bit further to get to the next one. So here's my 3rd dot. And then I'm just going to stop there. And then I'm going to pull so that I have threads to pull on later. So that one is finished. Now I'll just do the next one quickly. You can watch if you need to. Finding my dot, slightly closer than 5/8, making sure I have thread to pull on. Going through that first dot, which is just the seam marking, onto the 3rd dot. And stopping at that 3rd dot. And once again, making sure I have enough thread to pull on later. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. I have already done one of my ease stitches. I did one from this dot to the seam dot and to my next dot. So that's for gathering the top of your sleeve. The second one, you can either do the way that they have described, or you can do what I did and put a separate one between the dots. You will start 2 ease stitches right here at the notches, and then you will take both of those all the way through the top of this shoulder and end over here. So once again, on mine, I just did between these 3 dots because I know I'm going to need to gather that more. And through the notches here are where I'm going to put my second one. So I'll show you both of those now. So to do my ease stitch, I'm just going to put this on the longest stitch again. And then I'm going to start at the top of my shoulder piece at the notch, slightly in from 5/8 so that it won't show in my seam. Make sure that the threads are long enough. And then start doing your ease stitch. Now since I already did this earlier on my dots, I'm going to take both the threads and move those over, and then I'm going to go slightly in from that stitch because I don't want to put them right on top of each other, so I'm just going to go a little bit closer to the inside with that. Going right through the seam dot, which is that middle one, and continuing on to the next one. Okay, there's my next dot. Okay, and then when you pull it out, make sure you have, oh, there we go. Make sure you have enough threads to pull on later. So I finished my E-stitching, and then for the next step, I'm doing step 15, and we're just going to be stitching the sleeves together. I've already pinned this one, so you can see what this looks like. Okay, there's the end of my sleeve, and here's the top with the shoulder. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now to do that on this piece, we're going to put right sides together. So my good side of my fabric's over here. So right sides together, like this. I would recommend that you match up your notch first. So my notch is here. Pin that together. Then pin the top of your piece together. All right. And then pin the bottom. Then you can just match up your edges as best as you can. And then all of this has to get pinned. And as I usually say, you can choose how much you want to pin things. You can put in a few pins or pin a lot. I'm going to use a lot of pins because of my squirrely fabric, but you use however many you feel comfortable with. I will be basting from about here down so that I can do a fitting later, and it will be up to you whether or not you want to do that. So I'm ready to stitch my sleeve seam here. I'm going to start at the top where the shoulder would be. And as I said before, I'm going to do my permanent stitch here at the top and then switch to a basting. So I'm going in at 5/8, and I'm going to stitch over my pins because my fabric is squirrely. Back stitching. And then right here at about the notch, yeah, that's good. I'll switch to a long stitch, okay? And then I'm just going to finish this up over these pins so that I can do a fitting on this sleeve later. Okay, so once you've either done your permanent stitch or basting or both as I did, remove all of your pins if you haven't already, and then just set those aside for now. The next step for the sleeve is number 16, and that is going to be how you finish the bottom of your sleeve. So if you're looking at the sleeve, here's the shoulder, and then you go down, and then right here around your wrist would be the part that you're working on. Because I need to do a fitting on this, I am not going to do that yet. So I'm just going to set aside my sleeve pieces. And then I'm going to go back to my dress F, because that is the design that I am doing, and find where I left off and then continue from there. So I just finished number 17, which was going to dress C and doing paragraphs 14 through 16. Granted, I haven't done 16 yet because of the fitting. So now we'll be moving to step 18, which is pinning the sleeve into the armhole over the short sleeve. Okay, so I'll walk you through that next. Once you get the sleeve sewn in, this is what it looks like. So here is my other stitch sleeve, and I wanted to show you how I go about making sure I put it in the right place. So if you marked your pattern correctly, you should have 2 notches to show you where the back is and 1 notch to show you where the front is. Sometimes I forget to do that, so I did figure out a long time ago how to double check that. Since you had to put your pieces together to form the sleeve, if you just match up take your sleeve pattern and then just match up the sides, you can look at which piece is higher and which piece is lower. So looking here, when I fold this over, I can see that the front piece is a little bit lower than the back piece. And then that puts the 2 notches in back with this piece being slightly shorter. So you can get your sleeve to do that same thing. If you lay it flat, so I know that this is the back piece and this is the front piece, because when this lays flat, this isn't as high as the back piece. So the next thing I'm going to do is use one of my pins just as a reminder that this is the back sleeve. Then I'm going to turn that inside out. Okay, like so. And then grab my bodice here. So if I know that this is the back piece, that means that my sleeve has to go in like this. So then if I match that up with my sleeve here, I know that this is how this needs to go once I'm sewing it inside. So what I'll do next is grab my seam here, and then I will match it up to the seam on my armhole, and then I pin that. It doesn't have to be perfect right now, it's just a general marking so that you know where to go. Okay, so this pins my sleeve in, and then all of this has to get flipped out. Oh, sorry. There we go. And then this is how I'll start pinning. So basically I just did all that to make absolutely certain that whenever I pin this, it's put in the correct way. The front piece is facing the front, back is facing the back, seams are lined up, because there's nothing worse in my opinion than stitching a armhole sleeve and then having to take it out. It's really a pain. So it's worth doing all of that work just to make absolutely certain that you have everything lined up the way that it needs to be. Okay, so I'm going to repin this and just make it nice, make it as pretty as I can. Matching up those seam lines as closely as possible. All right. And I'm going to do 2 pins here just to make sure that my seams stay open. Then the next thing I'll do is find my top dot. So you have the 3 dots that you did earlier. 1, 2, 3. The one that's in the middle is the one that gets matched to your shoulder seam. So this is my shoulder seam, and I'm just going to match that dot right over that seam. Actually, it might be easier for you to see this way. Yes. So here's my dot. Here's my seam. It needs to go right there. Okay. And I'm going to do something. You don't need to do this. I have to do this. I'm going to pull mine up just a little bit because I've done enough shoulders for myself now that I know that I need to do that for my personal fit every single time. So I do that on all of my patterns, no matter what pattern company I'm working with. This is the pin I use just to match the back piece, so I can take that out now. Now I'll go ahead and match up one of my side dots here to the side dot that's on my sleeve here. So right there. I'm just going to match those up. And I'll put in a pin there. And then I'm going to go to the other side and match up my dots there as well. So here's the dot on my sleeve, and here's the dot on my other piece. Match those up, get that in place. Okay, and then pin that. Now the rest of this has to get fit into the sleeve. So I'm going to go to my shoulder seam, which is right here, and I'm going to grab that ease stitch that I did earlier, and I'm just going to pull that until these match up. So now all of that fits in that section. And then I'll just wrap it around the pin here. Okay, a few times ought to do it. Then go to your other one, same thing, just pull until they match up. Okay, that's pretty good. And then wrap that around. All right, then go to my next one. So this is that other ease stitch I did. Now before I do this one, I'm just going to pull these threads out of the way briefly. This only gets gathered to the notch, so go ahead and take your pin, see how my notches match up here, and just pin that down. I'm gonna move this pin over just a little bit. Whenever you're pulling ease stitches, it's very good to get a pin exactly where your ease stitch is, just so that when you wrap this, it doesn't pull your fabric over in some strange way. So now that that's done on that side, I will pull this, same thing. I have all this fabric that needs to fit in this seam, so I'm just going to pull that. Okay, there, that's pretty good. And then just wrap that around the pin. Okay, flipping it to the other side, I have to do the same thing. Here's my notch, so I'm gonna line that up as best I can. And then pin that little area there that doesn't have any ease stitching. Okay, I'm going to move this pin over to where my starting of my ease stitching is, which is right there. Grab that loose thread and then pull. Pull gently, don't break your thread or you'll have to do all that again, and that will just not be fun, I promise you. A little bit more. Okay, that's pretty good. And then just wrap that. Okay, so we don't have at the bottom of the seam, we don't have any ease stitching right through that small area, so we're good there. But we need to move around these other things just so that they fit more nicely. So basically right here you can see I have all this bunching. I want to kind of smooth that out and have that as equal throughout this section as I can. So that looks pretty good now. And I would recommend that you start pinning from the middle. And I am going to use a lot of pins on mine because my fabric is difficult. I would actually strongly recommend that you use a lot of pins for this particular step, just because, especially if you're doing the dress F like I'm doing, there's a lot of fabric here. So there are several layers that are getting sewn here, and that can make things tricky. So don't be afraid to use a lot of pins in this particular step. Okay, same thing here. This one actually looks pretty good. This is fitted pretty well, so I think I'll just go ahead and pin it. Okay. Looking pretty good so far. Just use those pins as much as you need to. I'm actually going to put another one here. Okay. So we have 2 more sections we need to pin now. This is where the bulk of your gathers are. So just straighten it up however you want till you're happy with the positioning. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Pinning from the middle. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now we have the last section. This one we gathered a little bit, but it was the one that needed the least amount of gathering, so it actually looks really nice already. So I'll just pin that down. And then we'll go to the sewing machine and we're going to baste this, and we will look at the basting before we do a permanent stitch because sleeves are tricky. Alright, so turn it over and just make sure you haven't grabbed anything that you aren't supposed to have, and then it doesn't hurt to peek on the inside too, since you have, especially if you did this cap sleeve like I did. Just make sure that nothing looks amiss. Okay, so I will take this to the sewing machine and I will baste it, and you can watch me baste it. So I'm going to change the length to 5. My longest stitch, and normally whenever you're doing sleeves you would actually want to fit it over your machine like this. I found with the other sleeve that I did, it was easier for me to just keep everything up here, and it's just because I have so many layers here. This is very thick. So I'm going to baste this together. I usually like to start in the area that has the most gathers. Yeah, so I'm going to start here, and that's just because sometimes when you're sewing things that have a lot of gathers or a lot of layers like this, I find that in the area that has more gathers, it will move more, and then by the time you wrap back around to it, sometimes things will have moved in a weird way. So that is why I recommend starting in the place that has the most gathers. And I'm going right at 5/8 because if my basting looks good, when I come back and permanently stitch this, I will stitch right over the basting as much as possible. Alright, so here we go. Doing a basting right on top of the stitches. And I do recommend that you do this slowly. I have my hand on the inside of mine because I'm very gently pulling on that sleeve cap that I already sewed in, just to make sure that it's not gathering underneath here in some strange way that I can't see. Okay, getting a little tricky here in the inner seam. Lots of fabric here to deal with. Okay. And it doesn't hurt to pick up the foot and just reposition every now and then. check my cap sleeve under here again. Okay, feels all right. Okay, so now we've met up with our previous basting stitch. So let me just take this out and then take all of the pins out. Give me a minute to do this. Okay, and then once you've done that, flip out your sleeve, take a look at everything. Okay, this one, my sleeve cap still looks fine. Then flip out your sleeve cap so that you can actually see the sleeve that you just sewed. So right here, here's my sleeve. And then just check to make sure that nothing strange is going on. Okay, that looks good. Okay, all right, so that looks good. So now I'm going to permanently stitch that. Okay, so just give everything a gentle little tug. Make sure that nothing is in your way as you start to permanently stitch this. I'm going to turn my machine off, turn it back on, because that automatically resets my stitch for me. And I'm going to come in here and just make sure to note wherever it is that you start doing this so that you can find it again on your way back. Oh, you know what? Hold on. That is actually harder to do when I put it on the machine like that, so I don't want to do that. So I'm going to start in that same spot, but keep my sleeve up like this instead. I did my other sleeve on the machine like that and wrapped it through here, and it was very difficult. I do not recommend doing that with this particular project. All right, so now I'm going to follow that basting stitch as closely as possible that I just did. And if you want to, you can go slightly to the left of that just to encase all of that so that it doesn't show whenever you finish this stitch. I can feel that I need to pull my sleeve out under here a little. Ah, yes, that's much better. Okay. And just remember, when it comes to sleeves, that slow and steady wins the race. Okay. When you get to the bottom of the shoulder seam right here, if you're doing the same one that I am, don't be afraid if you need to push it through a little bit, because the fabric is very thick there, especially mine since I'm sewing with velvet. Okay, and I've reached my other stitching now. I'm just doing a little bit more just to make sure that it's really secure. Okay, and then when you reach a good spot, do a back stitch. I backstitched twice because shoulders take a lot of wear and tear and pull. Okay, and then just trim off your threads, turn it out, and check it again. Okay, so my sleeve cap looks beautiful. Flip that out, check your sleeve underneath. Great, also beautiful. Okay, so this is good now.